Oh boy, did I have high hopes for WrestleMania 18. I'm sure many did, because it should be no surprise to any wrestling game fan that the Aki titles on the Nintendo 64 were and still are regarded as some of the greatest games in the genre. So with the release of the console's successor, the Nintendo GameCube, came hopes that the legacy would continue to the next generation of hardware. It seemed like a no-brainer. THQ was still locked into contract with the WWF, No Mercy was released a year earlier to critical acclaim, a new game was certainly at least being discussed, so why not call our good friends over at Aki and have them start fleshing out plans for the next one? Unfortunately, that's not the way things would go down, as THQ and Aki would part ways, with the latter going on to develop 2003's Def Jam Vendetta. But there was still hope for the GameCube, because Yuke's, the very same company to bring us the SmackDown series on the PlayStation, would handle the development for WrestleMania 18. And they did a great job on those SmackDown games, so it wasn't necessarily a concern that they couldn't do the same here. As previews started to hit magazines and websites, many of us got excited. Some fans went out and purchased the GameCube just so they could play the WWF's next Nintendo entry. I mean, for God's sake, it was named after the granddaddy of them all. It's going to be great. On June 10th, 2002, WrestleMania 18 hit store shelves, and it's safe to say that the game didn't meet expectations. And it's not really just because of one single aspect, it just sort of lacked everywhere. Not to say there aren't good things that came out of the game, but overall it wasn't very good. Now, I for one do enjoy this game. I'm sort of fascinated by it in a sense. I can't really explain it. While I know it's not great, it's certainly not unplayable. I feel like there are many that sort of hover in this middle area regarding this title, and if you're familiar with the channel, you might know that I've covered this game in the past, but that was 10 years ago already, and there are many aspects of the game that I wish to dive into with more depth. So let's take a closer look at the good, the bad, and the oogly of WrestleMania 18. The game started development before the World Wildlife Fund would file a lawsuit against the World Wrestling Federation for use of the abbreviation WWF. This led to the original box art for the game being released with the words World Wrestling Federation with the WrestleMania logo. We would see Stone Cold Steve Austin, Hollywood Hogan, and RVD grace the cover. And I've always been a bit surprised that RVD was included here. Not to take anything away from him, but they'd usually reserve a spot like this for a Triple H or a Kurt Angle or Undertaker type of guy, so sort of an interesting choice. He was also featured front and center on the cover of Road to WrestleMania 18 on the Game Boy Advance. Shortly after the initial release, there would be a second featuring the updated WWE branding as well as a slightly modified background. The Japanese and PAL versions were released a few months after the US version and featured only the WWE branding. Those territories saw different box art, with The Rock replacing Austin, most certainly related to Austin leaving the company earlier in the year. This version would also later be used for the Player's Choice cover art in the US. Take note of the darker tone of the cover art, because really, that's a theme throughout the entirety of this game. The back of the box boasts all new superstars, high-flying matches, 3D through a table, NWO Invasion, and no escaping the cage. You can see how they're hyping up the inclusion of the NWO here, and for good reason. While the angle was ultimately a letdown, there was a decent amount of hype around it. These were three huge superstars returning to the WWF for the first time in many years. That darker tone that we were speaking of earlier, it's included here in the menus, but nonetheless they're clean and easy to navigate. They're definitely a bit on the simpler side when compared to those included on the SmackDown titles. Additionally, there aren't as many match types, features, and options here, so that sort of adds to the straightforward layout. There are 42 wrestlers to select from here, just 2 shy of what was offered in Just Bring It, so not far off. Now, one of the big selling points for me when this game came out was the inclusion of the NWO. a group I've been a fan of since early on, and as many of you already know, my favorite wrestler is Scott Hall, and this would be Hall's first appearance in a WWF game since WrestleMania the arcade game, and his final appearance during his time as an active wrestler, which I'm sure is another reason I tend to come back to this one as often as I do. Now, the promotion's top stars are all here, guys like Big Show, Benoit, Jericho, Kane, Kurt Angle, Austin, RVD, The Rock, Triple H, and Undertaker. This one would also mark some WWE debuts for the likes of Booker T, Hurricane, Lance Storm, Stacy Keibler, and Ric Flair. Well, actually, Ric Flair was in 1993's Royal Rumble for the SNES, so he doesn't count, but I always kind of consider this one his debut. It's sort of weird for me to see Jacqueline here because even though she was with the promotion until 2004, I always associate her with 1998, and really, that's about it. And wasn't Taz strictly doing commentary by this point? Not that that matters, I can appreciate the inclusion either way, but then why not include Lawler as well? We see some tag teams here such as the Dudleys, APA, the Hardys, and of course, Scotty 2 Hotty and Albert. We even get 3 out of the 4 McMahons here with Vince, Shane, and Stephanie available for in-ring action. There are, however, a few notably absent wrestlers here, guys like X-Pac, Val Venus, Spike Dudley, Perry Saturn, Hardcore Holly, Goldust, DDP, Billy and Chuck, Al Snow. It's kind of a long list. These wrestlers would have all been on the active roster during at least most of the game's production, so it's a shame they weren't included here. Though some of these missing superstars can easily be created in the game's Create a Wrestler mode, thanks to their assets being included, which of course we will touch on in a bit. One of the shining spots of the roster is the fact that each and every wrestler features 2 attires. Sure, it's a step back from the 4 options that were offered in the Aki titles and even the later Acclaim titles, but it's something that started to die off a bit during this era, and I'm happy to see some alternates here. Many of these secondary options consist of backstage or non-in-ring outfits. We see Austin in his What t-shirt and jean shorts, Triple H sporting his leather denim vest jacket combo thing, NWO members come out in jeans and t-shirts, as do the APA, and Tajiri even has his slacks and polo shirt look from when he was Regal's lackey. Many other wrestlers feature alternate in-ring gear, like Benoit's late WCW, early WWF blue tights, Raven's classic t-shirt and jean shorts look, Molly's Holly cousin look, and Booker T's red shorts, amongst others. Not all of them are great, but we at least get something for everybody. A handful of the previous generation of wrestling titles didn't feature fully recreated entrances, sometimes by design or by limitation, but by this point in time it was a safe assumption that every wrestling game from here on out would have said entrances, and thankfully that is the case here. Are they perfect? Not at all, but one could argue that they are better from some perspectives than those seen in other WWF titles before and even some of those WWE titles to come. For example, here they're presented from start to finish without the harsh jumps we see in Just Bring It, where a wrestler can literally be on the ramp and then they just appear getting in the ring. Okay, well they did do it here with Chris Jericho, and I know that's not really a big deal by most people's standards, but that kind of stuff used to drive me nuts personally, especially being a fan of longer, more realistic entrances. I will say the transitions between camera angles is a bit strange as the frame sort of pauses ever so slightly before flowing into the next. The camera angles themselves are great with signature shots like Big Show's low stage angle and Hurricane's end of the ramp zoom being recreated quite accurately. I'd say for the most part, animations look pretty solid, but it can be a mixed bag. For example, and you know I'm gonna use Scott Hall, I apologize for playing favorites. They managed to get his signature getting into the ring maneuver down better than I've seen in any other game, even to this day. But then the in-ring taunt is sort of a miss. It honestly looked better in Revenge 4 years and 1 console generation earlier. But then his stage taunt here is actually done rather well. And this is sort of the running theme here. You might see a good taunt with a questionable walking animation, or a realistic walk with a suspect-looking taunt. And let's talk about some of those walking animations, because they did nail down a lot of these signature movements, but others are just lacking a bit, like Rikishi, who appears extremely robotic, or Chris Benoit, whose leg movements just appear truly unnatural, and just about any of the women wrestlers. I'm not sure what happened with these ones. Now, they aren't WWF Raw on the Xbox bad, but they could have used some refinement. One cool inclusion is the team entrances, so you'll be able to see the entire NWO make their way to the ring, as well as the Dudleys, the Hardys, the APA, and others. Interestingly enough, teams that consist of 3 members will always include all of them, no matter what. So even if you've selected a tag match as the Outsiders, Hogan will accompany them despite never appearing again during the match. Cages and cells will also appear during entrances, which is a rather cool look. But because of this, animations are forced to be cut short, ending just before the wrestler hits the ring area. And sadly, champions will not come to the ring with their belts, even during title shots. And then there are the tremors, and you're probably wondering what that means. Well, you see, a lot of these wrestlers are a bit shaky. Now, I don't know if they're all hyped up on caffeine or having some sort of medical emergency, but there are these very visible moments where wrestlers are seen with vibrating heads, arms, or legs, or they're just overly jerky in general with their movements. You don't really see this in-game, so I don't know why it's happening here. One of the things I always loved about the entrances here is the fact that wrestlers don't come out right away once their theme music hits. There's a realistic delay that we didn't typically see in these games at the time, and it adds to the genuine feel of an entrance. Something that's missing, though, for some wrestlers is accurate theme music. This often becomes an issue when dealing with licensed music, so some pretty well-known entries were omitted here and replaced by generic tracks. The iconic NWO theme is notably absent, with a somewhat similar but rather bland guitar-driven song put in its place, and while it's not as good as the real thing, it is sort of a guilty pleasure for me. I find myself kind of humming this one in my head every time I play this game. Booker T's entrance music, a song which he had been using for years up to this point and would use for many more after, is also missing, replaced by what I'm assuming is a Jim Johnston production. And fun fact, this one was also used in the car combat video game WWE Crush Hour, so if it sounds familiar, you might have heard it there. Tajiri and the Hardy Boys also have generic entrance music here, but The Undertaker's Limp Bizkit theme, as well as RVD's Breaking Point song, both made it into the game, despite them being replaced in some other titles. Something odd that I came across while researching for this video was that some versions of the game feature Trish's Whiplash theme. However, mine does not. Instead, she comes out to a generic theme that sort of resembles an instrumental version of her later entrance music. Moving along, the pyrotechnic effects are decently presented here, though they do appear quite blurry up close in comparison to other visuals. But I'd say most everything is accurate, from Kane's in-ring fire to Kurt Angle's cluster of bright explosions and the Dudleys' airstrike blasts over to the stage. I do always get a sort of chuckle, though, when I'm watching Booker T's entrance. I'm always anticipating this giant, bright burst of flames engulfing the entire stage area, and instead we get a few little puffs of fire. But to be fair, I think his first few entrances in WWE actually featured this. I'd say that the lighting is one of the things that really carry these entrances over to the next level. You'll notice a lot of entrances might appear a bit darker than you'd expect, but even considering this, the lighting in this game truly helps recreate that atmosphere that these real-life arenas had during this era, and essentially makes many of the previously mentioned flaws sort of an afterthought. So yeah, there are some things that missed the mark, but I still find the entrances here to be some of my favorites from this entire generation of consoles, really. Before we finally dive into gameplay, I'd like to first take a look at the arenas WrestleMania 18 has to offer, because while it's not a huge amount, I can appreciate the selection we were given. Again, I'm going to mention this game's darker tone because it's quite the opposite of the SmackDown titles from the same time frame, or even the games that preceded this. The set design details are sometimes hard to point out because of this, and yes, that's pretty valid compared to their real-life counterparts for the most part, but arenas like the SmackDown Fist stage just look a little too dark. Jumping into this next generation of consoles definitely had its technical advantages, as many wrestling titles that came before this had to render multiple versions of entrance areas. One higher res version for things like entrances or fighting up on the stage area, and a lower res version to be used for more distant shots like during matches. It's nice to see a seamless view of these stages here, where one can walk from the ring all the way up under the Titantron in a single movement, not bounded by load times or screen transitions. I will say I'm a bit disappointed that Minitrons are only active during entrances, but I wonder, why is this? Could it be a technical limitation that doesn't allow them to be played during matches, or simply an oversight? Either way, they don't move. Well, there is some movement here on the SmackDown Fist stage, but it doesn't really look quite right. They did pay great attention to detail here, though. You can clearly make out the bunching and the curtains or backdrops that hang in portions of the designs, and look how good this grading looks. Scaling looks about right too. I mean, some of these sets were pretty massive, and they feel that way here as well. They even included varying venue sizes, so shows like WrestleMania truly feel larger and more grand than, say, an episode of Raw. And this game features what I'd say is probably my favorite looking classic SmackDown stage in a game from the time, though it's a shame we can't venture over to the Ovaltron. Why is this damn thing here? One thing you'll notice here is that even though this game was re-released with the WWE branding after the promotion lost the rights to use WWF, you'll still see plenty of WWF logos and references in this game, especially when it comes to the arenas. All of which I should mention feature two breakable ringside commentary tables featuring fully three-dimensional models for JR and Jerry the King Lawler. Outside of all the praise I'm giving here, I have to call Yuke's out for the ring aprons. There's so much accuracy elsewhere, and then they decide to just use event logos for all four sides of the ring. Despite the fact that most of these setups by this point were using the WWF.com skirts on the sides of the ring that face the aisle, as well as the commentary tables. Not a huge thing, and honestly I don't even know if I ever noticed this as a teenager playing this, but it's something that stands out to me now as a middle-aged man who makes YouTube videos about wrestling ring designs. This is the era of wrestling games where the crowd still looked pretty bad. I can't say they look great even today, but here they consist of 2D sprites with limited frames of animation. They never sit down, they never stop moving, some of them have their animation speeds dialed up to 200%. It was a different time for sure, but it looks fine considering this. I'd argue that some of the crowds consisting of 2D sprites looked better than the initial jump to polygonal models early on. When talking about the gameplay engine, I think it's important to start at the control scheme because this sort of sets the stage for the entire experience. The left control stick navigates your wrestler around, with walking being your default movement. You can run by pressing the Y button, and this is used for climbing the turnbuckle as well. X is used for multiple actions, such as getting onto the apron and stepping through the ropes, in addition to climbing cages and ladders for those specialty match types. Holding X while running towards the ring or ropes will cause your wrestler to quickly enter or exit the ring. The Z button is used to pin opponents and make a tag to your partner during tag team matches. Pressing the directional pad in any direction will allow your wrestler to perform a taunt, while the right analog stick, also known as the C stick, will focus your wrestler onto different opponents, if applicable of course. Reversals and blocking are handled by the shoulder buttons, not unlike the Aki titles on the N64. R is used to counter strikes and weapon attacks, while L is used for grapples. You can also duck and dodge attacks by double tapping in any direction, which is something I always forget about while playing this game until I somehow manage to do it accidentally. Let's get into your offense. Pressing A while standing close to an opponent will perform a grapple move. Pressing it together with either up, down, left, or right on the control stick will each perform an alternate grapple move. This means there are 5 different grapples assigned to each wrestler for the front and back sides of your opponent respectively, and this unfortunately is where things start to become a little disappointing, as this just doesn't allow for a lot of offensive options. Other wrestling titles gave us additional grapple moves to be performed with either initiating a strong grapple, think No Mercy, or performing moves on groggy opponents like in SmackDown, but with just 5 front grapples here, matches sort of lose their luster rather quickly. Now the striking system performs the same way, but they did incorporate a weak and strong version for each strike, by the way of tapping or holding B, and this is really how grapples should have been set up as well. Continuous striking will result in combos, another mechanic that had recently become the standard in wrestling games. Grapples and strikes can be performed while running, as well as during moments when opponents are running, such as being Irish whipped off the ropes, which can be done by pressing A and Y simultaneously. It's a bit weird to get used to at first, but thanks to their close positioning on the controller, the 2-button combo feels pretty smooth within a short time. Mat or ground attacks and grapples are performed by using the A and B buttons, while X is used to raise opponents to their feet. You can also perform strikes with B and grapples with A with your opponent at the turnbuckle, and of course, we see diving attacks on grounded or standing opponents performed with the B button. And then there are the finishers. These are performed by pressing A and B simultaneously, but have to first be earned before they can be dished out. The adrenaline meter is this one here and fills as you perform successful moves, counters, and taunts throughout the match. From my experience, it's quite easy to fill this meter rather quickly with spamming strikes. Once filled, this indicator will light up, letting the player know that they can now perform a finisher, with a capacity of storing up to 3 at a time. Unlike similar games, there's no need to initiate any time-sensitive special states or make sure your opponent is groggy. It's really as simple as just being in the right position and pressing A and B. There's also a spirit meter here, but it's not necessarily related to finishers. It's essentially the current condition of a wrestler, so if a wrestler takes continuous damage, their meter will become blue over time, putting them in danger of being defeated. Movesets can be a bit off and unbalanced. Undertaker has both the chokeslam and tombstone as regular moves, while many other wrestlers are stuck with basic scoop slams and suplexes and back rakes. Now this is essentially based on a wrestler's real-life moveset, so it does make sense, but many wrestlers are missing moves or were given moves that they don't necessarily do. Scott Hall has no fall-away slam in his standing grapple arsenal, which was one of his signatures, while Hogan performs Triple H's running knee to the face. I don't remember that. And though Vinnie Mac does perform the stunner as his finisher, it's the Austin version. You know, the one he would hit on The Rock and The Rock would just go flailing around the ring. It just looks really weird here. Many moves were plucked from the SmackDown titles, so you'll see some familiar animations here, and everything looks alright. I'm not a huge fan of the way the moves appear here for the most part, but there are definitely those that are better than others. Others being Booker T's axe kick, it's pretty bad. And don't get me started on Raven's even flow DDT, it's literally the same basic DDT that every other wrestler has in their standard set of grapples. Jeez. But then moves like the pedigree, rock bottom, angle slam, and the last ride are pretty solid, as one would expect. Finishers like Hogan's leg drop and the People's Elbow are a bit clunky here, as they aren't pre-rendered start-to-finish animations like we'd seen in the SmackDown games, but more so like what we got in No Mercy with a sequence of animations playing out in real time. This of course means they can be interrupted. In fact, the player themselves can stop these finishers before they're completed by simply initiating any sort of action that overrides it. I'd say overall the animations can be a bit awkward, even stuff as simple as walking just appears sort of weird at times. While some of the winning animations are a bit off or just super generic, I'd say for the most part they're pretty close and accurate. But then there are the weird ones. So now that we've got the technicalities under our belts, let's talk about how it truly feels, the player experience. Well, it's underwhelming. That lack of grapple options really does limit the replay value. I mean, I don't necessarily want to have a very long match if I'm having to perform the same moves over and over again. I once heard somebody refer to this game as not being bad, just boring. And I can kind of see where they're coming from. The gameplay is very basic. The controls also feel a bit sluggish, with every command having a slight delay. This can obviously become a bit frustrating both on the offensive and defensive side of things. I sometimes feel like I just can't counter my opponents in time, which typically leads to me just spamming the shoulder buttons. There's not a great flow to the gameplay, and I feel like that's such a vital component to a wrestling game. It has to flow, there has to be a balance of push and pull, but that's just sort of missing here. Another frustration is grapples and strikes that don't land, despite your wrestler being snugged up right against your opponent, or having your wrestler throwing non-stop punches while your opponent's on the mat, as the game should obviously recognize this, allowing you to perform ground attacks. Sometimes I'll perform a running attack, and while it does land on my opponent, it also takes me out for some reason. I don't even know what's going on here. Regardless of all this, it's still playable. There's still some fun to be had, and you can feel that the foundation is here, as future games in the series would build on this, resulting in a really good game engine. In addition to singles matches, you'll find most of the standard inclusions here, such as tag team, handicap, triple threat, fatal four-way, battle royal, and Royal Rumble. Now, one thing I've yet to mention about the game engine, because this is where it's going to become relevant, is the fact that there isn't a single strike, grapple, submission, or really any animation in general that is exempt from interruption. So unlike those other games we've been making comparisons to thus far, you aren't guaranteed to finish every move you've started. All it takes is a simple strike to break up a finisher, or to send an opponent off the turnbuckle as he attempts to climb it, and of course, put a quick end to a submission hold. And if you're fighting in close quarters, this can quickly become frustrating and really slow down the pace of the match. Not to mention, the referee is prone to getting in the way, so your wrestler's finisher might accidentally clip him, leaving nobody to count that 1, 2, 3. But again, this isn't unlike an angle we might actually see during a live event, so there's that. Either way, you'll likely see bodies go flying in any sort of match type that contains more than a couple of wrestlers. Tag matches can be played in the traditional format or tornado tag. It seems weird to call it tornado tag since there's no actual tagging. The player can choose to control either one or both wrestlers during a standard tag match, though I tend to get bored if I'm just standing on the apron watching, which usually leads me to pulling weapons out from under the ring and throwing them at the official, or beating up on the other opponent who, for some reason, refuses to fight back. Handicap matches are much of the same, as they can be played with or without tags and are only offered here as 2 versus 1. Triple threat and fatal four-way feature 3 and 4 wrestlers respectively, with the first to score the pinfall being declared the winner. Whereas the Battle Royal also features 4 superstars, though here the winner is the last wrestler standing. Many of these can be set up in a multitude of match types such as hardcore, cage, Hell in a Cell, ladder, table, TLC, and the Iron Man match. So let's take a closer look at each of these. While you can use weapons in a standard match if you've selected no DQ for the rules, hardcore is the match type that has them readily available around the ring area from the sound of the bell. You'll find the stereotypical wrestling items here, such as steel chairs, sledgehammers, cookie sheets, trash cans, and of course, ladders and tables. Proportions are definitely a bit off here, with most weapons appearing quite a bit on the larger side of things. Picking up weapons is not as straightforward as one might like, as both the A and X buttons need to be pressed simultaneously. It's not really that it's difficult, it just feels more complicated than it needs to be. Okay, well, sometimes it is difficult. Weapon shots aren't very satisfying to deliver. They feel sort of light and lack that heavy impact that we crave as the destruction-driven fiends that we are. I mean, you can literally chuck tables and ladders like 20 feet across the ring area. You can also spam any of these attacks over and over again without ever having to give up the weapon in use. That is, of course, unless your opponent counters your attack. But otherwise, they never break and you won't be forced to drop them, so wail away. Weapons can sometimes become a bit twitchy on the mat and will often go flying when move animations cross their paths. It's actually quite unintentionally hilarious. And even if that isn't a good reason to enjoy a game, you know, basically being entertained by its flaws, it's still one of the reasons why my friends and I had plenty of fun with multiplayer hardcore matches back in the day. The ladder match. Ah yes, a staple by this point in gaming. Grab a ladder, set it up in the middle of the ring, and keep your opponent down long enough to grab the title hanging high above. The X button is used to climb and to stand atop the ladder. Pressing X again will allow your wrestler to attempt to grab the belt, while pressing B will perform a diving attack. You can also strike and grapple while climbing the ladder alongside an opponent. Opponents and even tag team partners will often knock you off the ladder, sending you and potentially someone else crashing down to the mat along with the ladder. The AI will also produce some head-scratching moments here, such as wrestlers continuously pulling out the ladder from underneath their own tag partner. Just like how pins and submissions are determined on the game's momentum meter system, that's true here as well. So if your wrestler's momentum is low, you can seemingly jump for that title all you want and probably will never grab it. On the other hand of things, if the momentum is in your favor, it's more than likely a pretty quick and easy win. I love me a good table match, the unpredictability, knowing that the match can really end at any moment. I've always felt like this mode translates well to video games, especially if you're given the tools to do it right. This one is pretty straightforward, with multiple ways to send your opponents crashing through tables. You can Irish whip a wrestler towards a table, which will lay them on top of it, allowing for a player to then climb it and perform any standard grapple move or finisher on their opponent. You can also break through a table by performing long enough reaching moves near it, such as but not limited to suplexes and most rebound grapples. Tables can be set up in the corners of the ring and opponents can be Irish whipped against them, though again, no grapple moves here, just basic strikes and running strikes. And finally, diving attacks can be performed onto opponents laying atop tables. I'd say one of the most challenging aspects here is the fact that opponents and even your own partner will usually grab any table that's been set up. Tables can also go flying at times for random reasons, such as simply being attacked while in possession of one. Either way, this one is quite fun, especially when played with more than 2 wrestlers. Moving along the list, we have the cage match, where the objective is to climb up, over, and out to win. Simply press X to climb the cage and hold up to exit. I think we're all used to either button mashing or timed minigames that are required to exit a cage, so this feels a bit too easy. Though, like many other match types here, climbing out of the cage is based on the status of your momentum meter, so if you take that into consideration, I guess there is potential for a challenge. If your meter isn't looking so hot, you can hold up all day and never actually make any progress. And even the AI knows this, as they'll just sort of stand there and watch you as you endlessly exert your precious energy in an attempt to accomplish a task that just isn't meant to be. Oh, and I love how when you finally do exit the cage after all that hard work, you appear right back inside of it for a winning celebration. If you start climbing the cage and suddenly realize an opponent is hot on your heels, you can also perform a diving attack. Other than that, there isn't much here that makes the match type stand out. If you want something with a little more freedom, well, you know what you want. You want the Hell in a Cell, because while this one also features a cage around the ring, it's much bigger, so you can now exit the ring and fight outside of it. But that's not all, because these cell walls are clearly gimmicked, as they can be destroyed with just a few bodily impacts as they disintegrate into pure dust. And unlike the typical cage match, this cell comes equipped with a roof. Simply scale the walls, invite your opponent up for a visit, and send him crashing through the center down into the ring below, injuring yourself in the meantime. I would have liked to see the ability to throw opponents off the sides of the cell, either by way of special moves or even just Irish whip, but unfortunately it's not an option here. There are invisible boundaries that cannot be broken. You can, however, perform diving moves off of the cell, but it's a bit dodgy at times, and as hard as I tried with numerous wrestlers, I couldn't seem to land on the commentary tables below. And of course, we have the high-flying TLC matches. Out of everything listed so far, this is probably my favorite of the bunch, especially when played with multiple people. Because as I mentioned, many of the things that are sort of off about the gameplay make for some super entertaining moments. Ladders flying out of the ring, weapons bouncing off of wrestlers. It's frustrating at times, but it becomes comical with a group of friends or family. Just as we saw in the ladder match, you'll need to grab the championship hanging above the ring to get the win. This is where many of the most exciting moments I've had with this game have taken place. It's a little disappointing, however, that you can't dive outside of the ring from a ladder positioned in the ring. There's another one of those invisible barriers that prevents you from doing so. This is the match type I usually gravitate towards whenever I boot this one up. Well, that is, of course, when I'm not playing the Royal Rumble, because this has been my main go-to in a wrestling game since the days of WCW NWO Revenge. Well, technically it was a battle royal in that game, but you get the idea. Up to 30 superstars can be entered into this match type, where the goal is to send opponents over the top rope in order to eliminate them. Due to limitations that were common with many other wrestling titles in this era, only 4 superstars can participate at a time, meaning that instead of an entry coming into the match every 1 to 2 minutes, there may be moments where nobody enters the ring for quite some time, especially given the fact that it's a bit more difficult in this game to successfully eliminate opponents. You'll need to wear them down, lowering their momentum, and often utilize double teaming with the AI to finally get that elimination. You can also eliminate yourself, which I always find fun for some stupid reason, and tend to do way more than I should, usually followed by a moment of sadness, because once you're gone, that's it, you're not coming back. Rules are non-negotiable here, so no custom Royal Rumbles allowing for pins or submissions or anything cool like that. Over the top elimination, and that's it. And at the end of our match journey today, we have Iron Man. This is a time-based match where the player selects up to 60 minutes, and the wrestler with the most successful pinfalls and submissions during that time frame is declared the winner. I can get down with maybe 10, maybe 15 minutes on one of these, but that hour is just too long for a game with such limited gameplay. Maybe it's just me, I do have a short attention span, so it's probably not a surprise that this is my least favorite of the match types. While this one is limited to only one-on-one, you can select your preferences for rules, meaning you could make it submission only or turn off DQ or even turn off pin, submission, and DQ, so there's really no possible way to win. Now, we've touched a bit on how great the arenas look here. It's truly the shining spot in terms of visuals because the wrestler models aren't always the best. And this isn't just in retrospect. It's not just because the game's older, because even upon release, the visuals were considered to be just average at best. A few wrestlers have misproportioned body parts, some aren't very detailed, and others don't really resemble their real-life counterparts. Guys like RVD and Test are lacking accurate facial features. Booker T's hair looks truly awful, and I swear his eyes, they look solid black here. Is he possessed by a demon? I don't know. Farouk doesn't quite look like Farouk, and I can't quite figure out why that is. Rhino's hair is doing strange things, and this Benoit model, I'm not quite sure what happened here. But hey, it's not all bad here. There are definitely some decent looking models such as Hollywood Hogan, Scott Hall, Tajiri, Rikishi, Kurt Angle, the Hardys, William Regal. There's definitely more good than bad. Not to mention, I'm judging these visuals based on how the models look during entrances, because that's when we get the closest look at their faces, but with that heavy emphasis on dark lighting, it seems to be casting quite the bit of shadowing on the wrestlers' faces, and I think that's doing more harm than good, because when these models are examined in the game's Create a Wrestler mode, it's safe to say each and every one of them looks drastically better. The game's music is actually really good, and some of these tracks fill me with nostalgia every time I hear them. When you spend hour after hour in a game's Create a Wrestler mode, you tend to become attached to whatever song's being played, and it sticks with you for sometimes years afterwards. And this is the case here with this smooth little number that lives in my head rent-free. The options theme has always reminded me of a 90s R&B song, like maybe something you'd hear by TLC or something. The rest of the soundtrack is comprised of more upbeat, almost dance-like tracks. There are definitely songs I prefer more than others, but I won't lie in saying that this entire soundtrack gets the occasional playthrough during a long day of work sometimes. Now, the sound effects, on the other hand, they aren't generally very good. I will give credit where it's due. The pyro sound effects are loud, bright, and truly help to bring the aspect of the entrances to life. Things like strikes, landing on the mat, weapon impacts, tables breaking, they all sound a bit muffled and overly compressed. And I always have to laugh at the submission sounds. It sounds like bones crunching or something. It reminds me of WCW NWO Thunder. The game's also lacking any commentary, despite King and JR sitting ringside. Now, I don't know if that was a time constraint thing or a storage limitation, but either way, some players might miss this feature, as by this point in time it was pretty much a standard inclusion. One of the things I was anticipating most upon the release of this game was seeing what the career or story mode would offer, especially after No Mercy. And to my disappointment, there isn't any. In its place is the Path of a Champion mode, which is quite literally just a series of matches that leads to a title shot. You can contend for the heavyweight, intercontinental, European, hardcore, light heavyweight, or tag team titles here. Regardless of which series you select, you'll be forced to participate in a number of different match types in various arenas. Matches must be won to progress, and after a series is completed, championship history is recorded in the game's data. So while you won't actually see wrestlers enter a match with their title, lower thirds will indicate current champions. This mode is also how you'll unlock the game's hidden wrestlers, which consist of Vince McMahon, Rhino, Chris Benoit, Raven, Ric Flair, and Stacy Keibler. The classic SmackDown arena can also be unlocked here by winning the heavyweight championship with The Rock. There are a few more unlockables, some of which are not related to this mode, such as the Royal Rumble 2001 arena, which is earned by winning a 30-man Royal Rumble, and the WrestleMania 17 arena, which you'll get simply by completing a match in each of the other arenas. It's safe to assume that most gamers were likely disappointed with this mode. Not so much for what it is, but more so for what it isn't. Without a true career mode, there isn't a lot to do here outside of your standard exhibition matches. There are, at the very least, the unlockables to earn, so it's worth playing through each series at least once, but it's not something I typically want to return to when I'm playing this game. In addition to Path of a Champion, we see the Battle for the Belts mode, and to be completely honest, it's mostly just a copy and paste of the former. You pick one of the over 40 completely custom belts and face off in a series of varying match types, where you'll eventually receive a title shot. One cool thing here is that you can change the color of a belt after winning it, and of course, save a title's history as it changes hands, but there isn't much else offered here, and despite the instruction manual stating that winning new belts and defending existing titles never gets old, I did grow tired of this one rather quickly. Now, you can play with 2 players here in the unification match, where each wrestler puts their title on the line and the winner unifies the belts, though this requires 2 memory cards, each with their own prior title history. I'd say that create a wrestler modes historically are where I've spent most of my time with wrestling games, going back to WWF Warzone and even in the more recent titles I've played. I'll start off by saying this one here isn't quite up to par with what we've seen in recent WWF releases up to this point. As is the running story so far with most of the game, it's just lacking. It doesn't feel complete. There are limited attire options, no hats, masks, glasses, or any sort of head accessories. Hair variety is sparse, and faces are all pre-made selections, so no picking from different eyes, noses, mouths, etc. There are a few faces that come with facial hair that cannot be removed, but for the most part, you can at least choose from different mustaches, beards, and goatees. There are a few faces here that might look familiar, as well as attires and designs to go with them. So if you're like me and you want to create players that weren't included in the game's roster, you can do so pretty accurately. Many of you that have been watching my videos for a while now know that I love creating the most bizarre and sometimes outright disturbing wrestlers possible, and thanks to the body morphing options here, I'm able to do so for the most part despite the otherwise limited options in this mode. You can set your wrestler's attributes, select from different entrance music, videos, and animations, and while there are a decent amount of original tracks here, mostly filled with wailing, distorted guitars, there aren't many additional entrance moves other than those used for the in-game roster. There are just a few here based on real-life wrestlers though, and I'd say they're mostly pretty spot on, even including pyro in all the right places. Entire movesets can be customized move by move, but unfortunately there just isn't a whole lot to choose from. I could be wrong, but I think this might be the only WWF or E game in existence to not feature a crotch chop taunt available in its Create a Wrestler mode. From Warzone to No Mercy, SmackDown, and even the GameCube games that were released after this, as well as the games on the Xbox, they all had at least one crotch chop. Not here, I couldn't find a single one. Taunts in general are pretty few and far in between, so it's not entirely a surprise. One inclusion here that I thought was pretty cool upon release was the fact that in addition to creating your own wrestlers from scratch, you can also select from using the pre-made in-game models as well, though you'll only be able to edit their names, attributes, moves, and entrances. But it's still fun to grab one of the game's wrestlers and make things weird. Outside of this, you can modify the movesets of the game's entire roster, so if you feel like swapping out the Big Show's chokeslam for a big punch or just giving a wrestler you don't like a bunch of silly moves, you're free to do so. Overall, I do like where they were going with this mode, but it does feel rushed and even unfinished. And honestly, I think that could be said about most of the game, outside of the roster, entrances, and a few other small things. But the gameplay just isn't polished, the movesets are limited, there's no career mode, the visuals need some work, and Create a Wrestler is lacking. Was the game rushed to store shelves? Well, I don't know, but it sure feels like it. There are typically two camps when we talk about those that grew up with WrestleMania 18 or played it upon release. It seems most either have fond memories of it and, despite its flaws, they enjoy it, and there are those that just downright hate it. Despite what the fans thought though, this one did receive decent ratings from critics. EGM gave it a 7.83, IGN said it was a 7, while Game Informer was a bit lower at 6.5, but not too bad overall. Many of the positives from WrestleMania 18 would carry over to the sequel, only being improved upon as subsequent releases would get better and better, resulting in the final game in the series, Day of Reckoning 2, being praised by fans and critics alike today. Love it or not, with all of its flaws, this game had to crawl so that game could walk. And it all started here, with WrestleMania 18. Thank you all so much for watching this video. I really do hope you enjoyed it, and I hope that you'll join me for the next one. Please let me know your thoughts on this one. Were you one of the ones that hated this, or did you get enjoyment out of it like I did? Stay safe and healthy out there, guys. I'll catch you back here for the next video.